And finally, one is very close to my heart, and I was very gratified to see it's quite popular: citizen science databases. Cornell is particularly a big advocate of this, though there are also government sites where you can just go in and anytime you go outside and see a bird, you just report it online. They don't care if it's a field trip, they don't care if it's an endangered species, they don't care if it's a certain site, they just want to know what you've seen and where. eBird is a great example of that. Project Feeder Watch, Christmas Bird Count, all sorts of local things as well. And there were lots and lots of people who did this, and as someone who's actually used it before, I have to say that was really exciting. There are times when I go online to get this information because it's not been published recently in the scientific literature, so I'll know how many bluebirds are in an area in 2004, but that was 4 years ago. So you can go and get up-to-date stuff for any region you want, or for all regions, and it's just because of people like you who go outside and decide, hey, they want to report that. So there are a bunch of other notable devices that were only mentioned a couple times, but I thought were really interesting just to see how people kind of, adapted stuff for use in the birding world. So handheld GPS units, kind of a no-brainer. You don't get lost, but also if you're out in the field and you see, a nest and you think, well, I want to come back and see how that develops over the season, you can mark it and then come back to the same place later. Cell phones. Who doesn't have a cell phone these days? Okay, a lot of people. I thought this was kind of funny. So maybe I can convince you. No, I'm kidding. People actually, what they said they wanted to use this for was when they're in the forest, or they're out, walking wherever, and they get separated. They don't want to say, hey, where are you? And, disrupt the whole area. And so they'll pull out the cell phone and call someone so they can be very quiet. And you can also use it when you're coordinating caravans to field trips on Saturday mornings. Anyway, all sorts of uses. Digital cameras, I couldn't believe I didn't even think of this one, but of course, lots of people take photos, lots of people digiscope, and this was quickly pointed out to me as being omitted on my suggestion list. Handheld recorders, a few people said that they prefer to use those rather than write down notes, because if you do this, then you might miss what's up here. It's also a little bit more permanent, and it won't run if it gets rained on. Someone mentioned bird whistles, and I don't know if this was a hunter or someone who just liked fowl, or if there are actually bird whistles for other species that you don't eat. But I thought that was kind of interesting because I kind of think of that as being a little old-fashioned, but again, it does fall under the realm of technology. This man here is wearing this little device, which I believe is called Song Finder, and it's a device that takes high-frequency sounds and preserves them intact, but just moves them down so that you can hear them. And that's really useful because as you get older, the first range that drops out for you is the higher pitches. I actually had a birding professor when I was an undergrad who could no longer hear chickadees and titmice because they were too high-pitched, and we would always have to point them out for her. So now they have devices like this that bring those sounds down into the audible region and allow you to still identify birds, even if you can't hear that great. Again, as I mentioned earlier, someone did say hearing aids, which I, of course, didn't even think of because I'm a little too young for that. But, hearing aids and glasses, if you can't sense the birds, you can't really do much. Down here, there are video guides to birds who knew. I sure didn't. And a lot of people said this was great for not just, hearing a song beforehand, but you can see the bird. You don't just see one picture of it in, 2 dimensions on a page. You can actually see it moving around, having a certain posture, doing certain behaviors, being in a certain habitat. And so this really will give you much more experience before you go out in the field to really feel acquainted with that species and where you might find it. And finally, my all-time favorite, up here in the top, a baby monitor. And one woman told me that she took a baby monitor and put one half on her roof in the fall and the spring, and took the other half inside and listened to migrating birds as they flew over. And she said that she got a really good quality one, and she was actually able to identify different species. And I thought that was just really neat. You would have to be very brave or have a great spot to do it, because I don't know if everyone could just manage to get this out on their roof, but it seemed like a really fun thing to do.
Well, that would be good for owls, too. If you had owls in your yard,
yeah.
And it's cold, you got the windows closed, and there's no problem.
Or you could put it in a bird box,
yeah,
or near a bird box.
Yeah, near a bird.
So, And after you have a few kids, you're not going to use it anymore, so you can just use it for something else. So, the philosophies of birding. I found that when people responded about devices, they very rarely just said, "Here's what I use." They would go into kind of a tirade explaining each thing. There was this very emotional response about every device that they used. And it was people seemed to feel compelled to justify what it was that they were using. But there was obviously a lot of thought behind it all, which is actually what I thought was really interesting. And one of my respondents summed everything up, I think, really nicely when he said there's a balance, and it's a different balance for each birder. And that's definitely what I saw. And there were two big trends. First was that no two birders have identical opinions about technology or use identical suites of equipment when they are birding. It was just amazing to me the variation, and even one person who would use one device in common with someone else would have many more that they did not share in common with those other people. And it was just really interesting to me. This is a modern age. Technology is everywhere. It is, there's tons of it. It's very easy to take places. It's so small. It's very portable. And so it is everywhere you look. And it's just really interesting to me how people have responded to that, not just by using it, but by really thinking about how they're going to use it and what's the best way to do so. So not only did I see variation among birders, I also saw a lot of variation within individual birders. So a lot of people had conflicting opinions about technology use in their own lives. And they would argue both its pros and cons. And so they would say, well, I'll use it for this instance, but I won't want to use it for this instance. And I actually found that lots of people didn't want to use technology at all. Or others said, well, if I'm going to do it, I'll do it only at home. Or I'll do it in my car, or when there's no one else around. And so there were all these little boundaries that little laws that